Ah, okay. Hello, everyone. Our eyes find this world, and my voice finds this moment. Human beings are creatures that, after a while of existing, begin wondering about how they are experiencing existence. Currently, our questions of how existence is being experienced has come to the mystery of consciousness. A wise man once made a distinction between the word consciousness and the word awareness. Consciousness is conditional. It requires a form to exist through. Awareness is unconditional. Awareness is how the mystery of consciousness is standing, and consciousness is how the mystery looks like. The surface and the depths of the ocean, the acknowledgement of the capability of an intelligence in the void. We human beings have so easily accepted cultural narratives, we have so easily accepted our history that it has bypassed our rationality in recognizing in the middle of nowhere we have in some sense planted flags of meaning. This question of could consciousness be rooted beyond the mind's domain is another way of saying, are our minds capable of understanding, accessing the origin origin of intelligence. Pretty much the title of this episode is another way of a human being saying that we look at a tree and we notice that the roots of the tree are in the soil. When a person first looks at a tree, the tree is defined based on its trunk, based on its branches, and so even its purpose of giving a fruit. If a person just looks at, let's say, the fruits of karma, one will not understand where their karma or in what their karma is rooted in. The idea is that the first person who saw a tree didn't know about the roots, and the first time the human species, I would say, acknowledged consciousness, it did not know about its roots. Now, the interesting thing is, based on the dimensions the world has, meaning arises. I want to share for the listeners a picture. There we go. David Chalmers is this pretty cool philosopher who proposed these modes of these perspectives upon consciousness. One is known as the easy problem, the other is known as the hard problem of consciousness. For me, the relationship of this is like how we're understanding the body is moving the mind and how the mind is moving the body, pretty much. The easy problem of consciousness. How does the brain integrate, categorize, and distribute information? How does it respond to environmental stimuli? How does it focus attention? where it says these things are known as the easy problem of consciousness as they can be functionally defined. That is to say, if we can find the function of the brain that performs these tasks, we have solved the issue. All of these questions are about identifying or specifying mechanisms that perform certain tasks. We've not done it yet, but presumably we will do with enough study. The hard problem of consciousness. The problem of explaining the relationship between physical phenomena such as brain processes and experience. Experience does not seem to be functionally definable. If we find the mechanisms that perform these functions, we would still not know certain key questions. Why is their performance accompanied by experience? Why one kind of experience and not another? Presumably, no amount of brain study or biological understanding would help us answer these questions. So guys, a good example of the hard problem of consciousness would be as if, why are we conscious of certain things and why are we not conscious of certain things? Why can we consciously, for example, move our hands and legs, and why can we not, for example, change our heartbeat or move, shift internal organs? You know, isn't it remarkable that the conscious persona is capable of moving its outside, but it is not moving its inside, technically, right? It's involuntary. So, easy problem of consciousness is a search inside the brain for that which functions, which brings the function of consciousness. Pretty much what part of the brain explains the function of, I shouldn't say explain, but where is consciousness hiding in the brain? That's the easy problem. And the hard problem of consciousness is, how is consciousness here? There's abilities there's ways that we can move behind our eyes, which in front of our eyes we cannot move. So we have consciousness, we have the mysteries of the brain, and we have the mysteries of the mind. Now, I would say that one of the biggest challenges is, in some sense, how do we give attributes, or how do we attribute attributes to what the brain is doing. And this is very beautiful because I see a lot of I understand the secular mindset. I understand how convenient it is to see nothing else. It's like human beings on the planet. I would say one thing that atheists and theists have in common is that they are both keen on being in one worldview, you know, rather than seeing that there's multidimensional, rather than seeing it's multidimensional. What the mystery of consciousness is pretty much how a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension are intersecting. And people will be like, Mr. Within, are you acting so bold that you're trying to solve these problems no one has solved? I'll be like, to me, everything is information shifting. Our understanding is just accessing different dimensions of information that is happening. To me, every human being is being conscious right now. That means technically the answer to the question of the hard problem and easy problem of consciousness. I mean, the easy problem may be way more technical, but the hard problem of consciousness, we are being it. You see, the mystery of consciousness is like saying, how are we being, how we're being. And every person has an answer to this. Now the challenge comes, is there a common denominator between the human design? Or in some sense, could it be that human beings are rooted in different dimensions of reality? That means the search for the hard problem of consciousness could go into like many pathways. What I have access to is that I am a conscious creature in this world, and because I'm a conscious creature in this world, I am experiencing the truth of consciousness. We all are. So I would say this is my consideration of what is going on with consciousness. We have space and we have matter. Or let me draw this different. We have matter and we have space. This point is consciousness. Consciousness requires, if we treat it as a sort of concept and context, or here I put surface, depths, or you can say esoteric and exoteric. The word esoteric focuses on the essence of something. The word exoteric is in some sense that which is on the surface. So consciousness is in some sense, we have its concept and we have its context. Okay, the surface of consciousness is pretty much this. This is like the surface of consciousness. And the context of consciousness is space. Now, let's say 0 is nothing. This is also, we can have this being a sort of, let's actually not call this consciousness, let's call this, let's call the central point of this thing I've drawn. Let me change the pen. let's say this is birth, okay? We give this 0. That means before somebody has been born, it's as if like they are in some sense like 0 in space. That means their physical value. I mean, I'm not talking about the child being in the womb. I'm talking about in regards to individual consciousness. Like the child in the womb is still part of the mother's consciousness. But I would say the child that is born, that means the moment there's an individual body, what does birth equal? You can say, and whoever's listening on a laptop, I recommend playing a song or something in the background. Anyways, to keep going with this, right? So, birth is like, you can say, let's say birth before a child is born, pre-birth. It doesn't have a body, and when it comes to its consciousness of mind, it's like there's nothing there. Now, let's say a child has this, we come here through matter, and let's say we have a 10-year-old child. Okay, I'm remembering myself when I was 10 years old. Let me see if I can just redraw this again. Okay. Let's say space is a constant, and let me make the chart into matter, or let me make it into time, and then this could be matter. So when the child is born, let's say in 10 years, child has, let's say, 10-year-old body, 20-year body, and we have 30-year-old body. does this suggest? It's a sort of capture of all the memories, consciousness, equals movement of matter in space. But somehow the space okay, I think I have an idea here. So, we're these conscious creatures in the realm. The child is born, let's say in 10 years, it has a body, and then with that body, through time, there's memory accumulation, a sort of layer building. What that means is, in actuality, this picture is like this. There's so many tiny layers involved. And this keeps on going. So if consciousness is, we say, okay, there's this body moves in the world, and it knows it moves in the world. If it knows through content, right, then in some sense it's conditional, which means brain, right? So let's say here, let's say if there was an invisible viewer that noticed it, if there was an invisible that noticed, oh man, how do I say this? The issue, I would say, main issue with understanding consciousness is that so I've written here the main issue with understanding consciousness is that as long as we have duality, we require two dimensions for the verification of, let's say, its truth. The issue with human understanding, I would say, is that because we're considering we are shaped beings, as shaped beings, we think that to understand something means to identify it related to our own shape. But consciousness is how a species, again, notices that there is an invisible occurrence. Right now, as I'm giving this talk, sure, my body's visible, my brain is visible, my neurons are visible and physical, okay? But what the neurons do leads to something that is non-physical. And so the question comes, could it be that the invisible is meaningless? That means there has never been anything invisible. It's just out of the access of the human brain. Or in some sense, could there be truly a Rene Descartesian invisible dimension? Could it be like, you know, we are inside the rooms of the same house, right? That could be a sort of mind, like the mind and body are two rooms of the same house. Or it could be this view that the body is the room of one house and the mind is the room of another, right? These are the possibilities we come across. To wonder about consciousness is like saying how can the visible become invisible. God, this handwriting of mine. Let me bring out the calligraphy pen. How can the visible become invisible? This is the easy problem of consciousness. How can the invisible become visible? This is the hard problem of consciousness. Now, I would say if we for a second paused the academic approach towards this problem and for a second we were like, okay, let's see what other examples of human life do we find in history where the way those human beings lived suggests that they had in some sense not only answered the hard problem of consciousness but knew the source of it. Okay, you see, guys, we're living in such a cool world and people don't realize that most people, I think, most generations of human beings, they actually never get a chance to wonder about how others are living, or how others are living differently on the planet, and how so many different people have lived on the planet. The world is like, like a compilation of human behavior simulation. Like there is so many human beings, that have been born in this world, that have interacted with the environment, that have on some level been in the experience of consciousness and had to confront their end, right? It's as if, like they say, honor your ancestors. A major reason why, like, a person can have this view that their ancestors their spirits were temporary. They were temporary minds, or they were eternal spirits. And if you consider for a second the vision of the ancestors to be an eternal spirit, it would be in some sense as if the reason we honor our ancestors is because they have gone through something we haven't yet. You see, they have entered non-existence. It's like a school, and like imagine a child going to the first grade, right, and thinking that it's the first child ever in the school, knowing that how many people have been in the school and they have graduated beyond this dimension, poetically. If we look at how the mystics, the rishis, the yogis, who to some degree are ignored by modernity for their reservations, the mystic, I would say, is wondering how can the visible be visible, and how can the invisible be invisible, or become invisible, or be invisible, I should say. The answer is instantaneous. The mystics were smart because, the challenge with being a persona in the space-time continuum and then trying to figure out the mystery and the truth of the realm is, in some sense, you're bound and limited by the persona that is filtering the meaning. The mystics, upon realizing that the visible reality is instantly being visible, suddenly wondered, okay, then it's like if a visible truth is instantaneously existent, could it be that an invisible truth is instantaneously being true? And so this is the idea of moksha and nirvana. For me, human beings that dedicate their whole lives to get enlightened, I understand your effort, I understand your sincerity, but the realization is that if you cannot access truth in an instant, you're not in the same room. There's this Japanese comic book turned into a show called Code Geass. Okay, not geese as in like Canadian geese, but Geass, I think. And in this show, the main character is like this really smart chess player, and he decides to take over the world pretty much in the show. Right? And what happens is that there's scenes in this show where this person who is like this chess player trying to take over the world, he suddenly says the conditions have been cleared. Now the strategy can go to its next phase. The tactics with the strategy can go to the next phase. Right? So similarly, I would say it's as if when the conditions for the mystical, for those who are interested in mysticism, see, mysticism is a direct experiential uncovering. Those who are interested in spirituality, pretty much life has pushed them to a moment where they have noticed, or they have met the unknown. They have met something that goes beyond the rational boundaries of how the realm should happen. You see, to rationality is another way of saying our memory has to confirm truth. But if our memories are a very small part of truth, then in some sense the rationality will always be staring at dimensions out of its reach, right? And so this is something very important, because in any moment, if a person chooses to be rational, you're considering variables to meaning, right? And the sequence of those variables to meaning. Now, if suddenly a new variable, imagine somebody's like trying to make a rational decision, I don't know, there's like, let's say an extra large pizza feeds 8 people, okay? And imagine there's 8 people in a party, and the party owner's like, all right, let's get a pizza here or something, And so the rational idea is like, okay, extra large pizza feeds 8 people, and so the person calls the pizza, orders, let's say, an extra large pizza for 8 people, okay? Now, imagine somebody, like 3 other people enter the party, right? And so then the pizza person who called the pizza now is questioning, did I make a rational choice or was it irrational? Or imagine before he sets the order, before he's given, like confirming the extra large pizza over the phone, the what do you call it? 3 people suddenly enter the thing, right? Enter the house party. And so suddenly it becomes this scenario where the person was like, I was making a rational decision, it's like to get a pizza, and then when new dimensions were added, the rationality was incomplete because there was more information. And because there's more information, rationality cannot be perfection. It is just the persona's way of getting by in the unknown. Everything is. This is something that I don't know why it isn't being shouted in the streets. But it's really that the body is a microcosmic position. If it starts to claim a macrocosmic truth, it will be humbled by how much it doesn't. I would say there has been, a reason, I would say, where people in history, okay, how would I say this? In polytheistic traditions, the idea has been that God is everywhere, and in monotheistic traditions, technically, God has imbued, a spark of itself, like the soul within everyone, but God can't be the person. It's as if it's inconceivable. That means really the difference between polytheistic and monotheistic traditions is, somebody had said it brilliantly. What was it? In polytheistic sense, it's everything is God's, Gods. In monotheistic tradition, everything is God's, God, and then what is it? An apostrophe and an S. Upon acknowledging our limitations, we release a species from its certainty of image. Not certainty of image. Of its, okay, how would I say it? In the modern world, many people dislike dictators, but I technically feel anybody who is egotistically driven is acting like a dictator behind their eyes, right? Anybody who has ambitions, for example, you see Olympic athletes fighting, competing, and it's as if each of them, in behind their eyes, they are the commanding force, like they are the mover of their moment. And so they have to. What is confidence? It's as if the inner attention knows where it's sitting, knows what belongs to it. You know. Now, when I say the dictator mentality, that comes in the competition in regards to one dimension having other dimensions not having. You know. The mystics pretty much reached a point where they were like, okay, matter is being matter, like what can I do about that? And then like space is being space. And so really, if consciousness is something that's happening, it's the energy of an event, of an experiential event, the person would be either like, okay, either space, either the intelligence that is leading to consciousness, it is either in space, like space is moving matter, or matter is moving space. When matter moves space, we call that free will. When space moves matter, if you were a religious person, you'd be like, God's will is at work. You know. And the idea is simply this, that there is no right or wrong in a changing world, actually. It's right and wrong is limited. It's limited to context. The first thing it's as if there's this view that a person should, they say knowledge is power, but they don't define what knowledge is, and they don't define what power is. The question should arise, I guess, from this framework that we look at other species. Like, I don't know if people, I've given these Mr.Within talks in like parks and just, in so many places where there's animals, and I'll tell you, like, it's like there was a time where I realized that cat was like listening to what I was saying. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is I have observed animal life, live streamed in front of me, and I have noticed that the lesser species, or let's call them the sleeping species. We are like the awakened species, and all the other species are still asleep. They're in the slumber of how their instinct traps their intelligence to just react off of the environment. The birds are content, the squirrels are content, even the gazelle before being chased by the lion is content, or after being chased by a lion is content. You see, it's as if the way our memory is accessed by us is very different than other species. They say, for example, dogs dream, or like animals dream. I think we should have this rule that anything that can dream and experience emotions shouldn't get killed. It's like a rare thing, rare evolutionary opportunity. We're pretty much an animal that somehow noticed beyond the environment, decided to build its own world in the natural world. And then when it made its own world, its development was through language. So it's as if we created a system, then used that system to create another system. Then from those systems, we created so many systems, and then we forgot that in all the unnatural systems, it had started from nature. So what I'm trying to say is that it is consciousness that allows meaning. If there was no consciousness, there would be no meaning. Do you know? When I say consciousness, I mean not that it's completely absent, but there's levels to it. Do you know? To me, I honestly feel we are cameras of higher dimensions. We are like surveillance. We are like the biological human being. It's like goggles for, you could say, a field of intelligence. We are like the sunglasses of the cosmos. So anyways, let me go back to this. Due to the instantaneous nature of the visible being visible and the visible being visible, on some level, being, the quality of something being, cannot be explained through time. It can only be explained either there is being, yes being, no being. There's either something there or nothing there. You know. But when it comes to what we do, doing can be explained through anything, through time, through language, through memory. Anyways, guys, I'm gonna put the notepad away. It's slowing me down. What can I say? We are all alive. We all wonder about what does it mean to be alive. We realize on some level, through an individual dimension, we have to create its meaning. In a collective level, we have to realize its meaning, realize its nature. You know, it's like looking at pretty much every human being I see, I ask myself, like, what is their nature? And what I mean by nature is that what is the forces that drive, their decision making? It's as if what sort of energy is not the person, not what sort of energy is, the question is not like what sort of energy the person's working with, but what sort of energy is the person working as. That becomes their nature. If a person has, a mind that doesn't trust the world, that mind will soon stop trusting itself, because we are an extension of the world. That means anybody who has said, I hate the world, they have hated themselves. Anybody who has said, I love the world, they have loved themselves. Now, the acknowledgement of, how would I say it? Maybe I would say it's like, what can the species do? Either we're gonna be like on this coin that is flipping in the air. That means chaos, order, visible, invisible, visible, invisible. That means there's sort of rhythmic explanation of reality. You know, a sort of changing sides all the time of perception. It's as if like, you know, the person, let's say a Buddhist asked this, like, let's say, you know, a divine sage, you know, that was I a good person in my past lives? Was I a bad person in my past lives? And imagine, you know, the divine sage says, buddy, you've been everything. You have been the worst, and you have been the best, and every time the waves arise, there are waves, right? It's as if like reincarnation is like the waves on an ocean, right? And the presence of attention. How would I tell you? It's like the world is an ocean, the human being is a wave. Civilizations rise and fall. There are 4 systems of thought that I would say Mr. Within has designed. Think of it as if there's 4 dimensions to life, and in these 4 dimensions, our understanding is limited to 1. Our ideological understanding is limited to 1. So what I mean is that technically being a biological human being, being a sense of self that is moving, that is receiving the senses and in some sense animating a sense of body, right? This is 1/4 of what is actually going on here, right? There is a dimension of space where I would say the mind is rooted, like space is like the atmosphere. You have to go beyond, or here, let me say it this way. It's like first the person's like, who am I? And then they're like, I'm my body. But then they ask themselves, okay, what is my body though? Who's moving my body? And then they realize they are their ego, their idea of self in their mind. Then the person says, how's the idea of me? How is my ego being my ego? This is where they realize the nature of memory. So a person realizes they're not just their ego, they are their memory, they are the brain's performance with all that it knows so far. Right? Now a person says, okay, where are my memories? And inevitably the reverse engineering of ideological conception goes towards a sort of origin where there had to be a space for there to potentially be something. For example, in the Big Bang Theory, it's as if first there was this potential pool of energy, and then this pool of energy, you know, bursts and then cools down, you know. It's technically, it's as if we are the implosion of an explosion. We are how an explosion is like imploding. You know, the universe cooling down is like consciousness returning to its origin. You know. Because the conscious being reverse engineers. It's as if like who created space for there to be the potential for anything to happen. The mysteries of dualism will go to space. And space is like the word imagination. Technically we use it, but we don't know what it's being used for. There's no content. There is no, let's say the realism factor is different. For example, what I thought was imagination, I realized there's no such thing. It's just that consciousness is functioning within a private domain and in some sense a public domain, right? It's as if everybody is living an inner and outer life. Their emotions are how their inner life is based on the health of their inner life, and their, you know, let's say their body is like that is in its own dimension of outer health. You know, there was this next level yogi, I think his name was Kabir, I'm not sure, but he had, I think it was Kabir, this mystic. And Kabir had this quote where he said something where he's like, you guys are living in houses. I am being an ever present awareness living inside my body. Right? Like that dude's house was his body. That's like next level mysticism. Can you imagine like a disembodied being and then the divine being like a real estate agent and being like, okay, are you interested in, in reincarnating in this sort of body, or would you like a different body, you know? And the disembodied being's like, I don't know, it's like maybe a better, I'll keep looking for property. But in reality, what is going on is that it's the evolution of shape. It's a sort of cycle. I don't know how to say it. They say there's a cycle of life. That cycle of life could be interpreted as, in some sense, a journey. We start from the unknown, we get to the known, and then from the known we go back to the unknown, and then from the unknown we go back to the known, unless the being can accept all its known dimensions and all its unknown dimensions. Let's say a very smart person on earth manages to accept like all the known dimensions of reality as they are, not just as they see it, right? Now it's like after you have learned, let's say you have explored, let's say somehow, let's consider for a second a finite universe, and let's say a person somehow managed to go everywhere in the cosmos and they managed to learn everything. Okay, all the greatest teachers in the cosmos and all the databases in the cosmos, and everything, all wisdoms, all jewels, diamonds of wisdom, let's say from the cosmos and from let's say the cosmos they received. Okay, they've learned everything that a physical self can learn in a physical world. A known self can learn in a known world. Then the only thing left, this is in some sense the perfectionism of a transcendental being, right? Where the person's like, okay, should I be dishonest and think that there's only objects here and nothing else? Or should I be honest to consider that space is a transcendental idea, the idea of a self as being a subject? Everybody is acting like a physical being, not realizing what is moving the physical is not physical. It's bizarre, like the age we're living in right now. Everybody is so content. It's as if we are so conditioned into accepting the world as it is that we never wonder about if it's being in another way, right? It's like people, the world needs explorers, and if human beings are to stop exploring the true nature of this world, it's as if we have failed before we have begun. It's like when a person doesn't do something at all, that's a failure. There's a type of failure where, let's say, the person goes through an event and then fails, like they don't win, right? And if they go through a journey, then there's a failure of never even going on the journey, right? And that's a different sort of regret. It's hilarious. The moment behind our eyes, I feel everybody is actually standing in a grand way. Everybody technically has to honor their existence to be able to endure it. And beyond the honor of the known world, we go to the honor of the unknown world. Now, if somebody was like, Mr. Within, what are you doing? Are you being like some spiritual guy contacting another dimension and giving these talks? Or like, are you like, being the doorman to the unknown? Like, and I will tell you, there was a time, guys, where it was, I would say, I entertained stories for truth. I was like, okay, I'll let truth be the story. But then I realized it's literally an endless movement. That means we are afraid of dying in existence, but existence doesn't die. That means on some perspective of looking at reality where like energy can't be created or destroyed, it's as if there is something here that will never stop being here, and we are in some sense travelers in the realm. That means imagine like people treated being alive on Earth as if it's a vacation for a multidimensional being. You know, it's like an eternal. Imagine an eternal sector of space was like, all right, I'm getting bored of just being everything all the time. Let me see, through dualism, how life would feel. It's as if we are like being a temporary being is like a vacation for an eternal being. You know, really, what it is I find that what is motivating evolution is not memory. It is just the unknown. The unknown is the purpose of the known entity. That means any being right now. It's like the mind can project its own heaven and hell. It's another way of saying every person's worldview, if their worldview cares for them, it becomes heaven. If their worldview doesn't care for their own self, it becomes hell. I remember hearing Terence McKenna speak, and he said that as old age comes, the body seems to become a place that's more uncomfortable to be in, right? That means it's like nature is designed so that these, let's say, multidimensional or potentially transcendental travelers, they in some sense do not stay it's like a traveler that can't stay where it's staying, you know. It's like you book a hotel for a week, and then after that week, it's like forces of nature will be like, all right, you've overstayed, you know. So similarly, that's the thing, and the idea is, I would say, and this is, I would say, the Raja Yogi in me, and the Karma Yogi in me speaking louder than the Bhakti Yogi within me. The idea is that human psychology, through desire, requires the ultimate. That's it. All those people buying self-help books, they're looking for the ultimate. All those people meditating in the mountains, they're looking for the ultimate. All those scientists, taking notes in classrooms, they're in some sense seeking the ultimate. Everybody wants to figure out what is going on, because if we don't, we never knew what we were. For me, this is what is one of the biggest motivations. Imagine, like, from the monotheistic sense, they say, like, the person dies, the body dies, and then their soul, their spirit is resurrected, and then they go through judgment. And imagine, like, this scenario where a person has, in some sense, passed away, and they have gone into this heavenly judgment scenario, and this voice of the divine tells them, why did you do this? Or it's like you're found, it's like you did these sins, and the person says, I didn't do these sins, right? Imagine this hypothetical setting I'm creating. And then the voice at the pearly gates says, in some sense, yes, you did, or like the voice says, explain yourself, what do you mean you didn't do these sins? Right? And the person says, I didn't know who I was when I was. You see? That means we don't know what is looking out through our eyes, and we name it, we clothe it in our memories, we clothe it in language, We give it sunglasses, native language for it to wear, right? And this whole time, because we have the incapability, or I shouldn't say we have the incapability, but because there is the inability to accept the unknown for being unknown, the desire for having to be reigns over us. It controls us. People don't say this, but what really power is, and what I feel even the concept of fame is in some sense a person's individual persona is being shifted for more of a universal archetype. Do you see, too? I would say for now a global archetype. It's like we don't know what's in our backyard yet. The species doesn't know the great potential we have in regards to how communication can advance if we choose to see it from a quadrant of from the 0 dimension, 1 dimension, 2 dimension, and the infinite dimension. This is Mr.Within school of thought, guys. For me, I have this feeling that the mind exists to participate in its future. The mind is here to get to see its own karma, right? People say they have karma, sure, but when you're a conscious being with free will, you're getting to see your karma, right? You know what it is? It's as if like it's a test. It's just such a unique scenario to be alive. Like the whole thing's strange. You know, existence is too big, right? Experience seems to be too small. And so it's like the tip of the iceberg wanting to have a purpose, you know. It's like a tip of an iceberg wanting to find truth. It's like it has to go within, and when it goes within, there is no within you go in. You just recognize how reality is being. You know, guys, I'm going to go into a quote tunnel right now. Speaking of consciousness, let's see Patanjali, or let me go to Kabir. Kabir, please. Kabir says, I laugh when I hear that the fish in the water is thirsty. I laugh when I hear that people go on pilgrimage to find God. Kabir says, be quiet in your mind, quiet in your senses, and also quiet in your body. Then, when all these are quiet, don't do anything. In that state, truth will reveal itself to you. There we go. Kabir says, the river that flows in you also flows in me. That means that every person has the same universal presence. On the planet, we're like, we're occupying, space-time continuum as each a member of the species. We're a member of the species in front of our eyes. Behind our eyes, there's a universal presence. Kabir says, what is the holy person? Kabir says, what is a holy person? The one who is aware of others' suffering. Kabir says, all darkness vanished when I saw the lamp within my heart. Kabir says, all know that the drop merges into the ocean, but few know that the ocean merges into the drop. Kabir says the beloved is inside you and also inside me. You know the tree is hidden inside the seed. Let your arrogance go. None of us has gone far. Inside love there's more power than we realize. Kabir says the truth of love is the truth of the universe. It is the lamp of the soul that reveals the secrets of darkness. Oh my God. These quotes are like Kabir should, like somebody build a time machine so Kabir comes and gives a podcast. You know, what am I doing here? Kabir says, I sell mirrors in the city of the blind. Kabir says music without words means leaving behind the mind, and leaving behind the mind is meditation. Meditation returns you to the source, and the source of all is sound. Kabir says, I went in search of a bad person. I found none as I, seeing myself, found me the worst. Because in all the flaws we see in others, our mind needs to have an access to their reality before we see it in others. Kabir says he is the real guru, who can reveal the form of the formless before your eyes, who teaches the simple path without rites or ceremonies, who does not make you close your doors and hold your breath and renounce the world, who makes you perceive the Supreme Spirit whenever the mind attaches itself, who teaches you to be still in the midst of all your activities, fearless, always immersed in bliss. He keeps the spirit of yoga in the midst of enjoyment. Kabir says, listen to your own self. If you listen to that self within, then you find the truth. Kabir says love does not grow on trees or bought in the market, but if one wants to be loved, one must first know how to give unconditional love. That means, guys, unconditionally loving yourself. That is, if any person can do that, you have transcended, any sort of, let's say, psychological suffering. There's like a lot of parents who unconditionally love their children, but how unconditionally do they love themselves? Everybody needs to just unconditionally love how life is a potential of being. Kabir says when the flower opens, the bees will come. I would interpret this that when we build the advanced civilization, many advanced beings from the universe will come. Kabir says wherever you are, that's the entry point. Some dude's like, some dude went up to Kabir and was like, hey man, how do I get enlightened? I don't know where to start. And Kabir's like, okay, wherever you are, start there. Kabir says, I felt in need of a great pilgrimage, so I sat still for 3 days and God came to me. All right, that's sort of, anybody who's like, just chilling, if you chill for 3 more days, God will come to you. Guys, modern mythology has so much potential to be created. People can create a god for house parties. It's like legend has it that when 3 people party for 3 days in a row, the god of house parties appears. Which is in some sense probably like the pizza delivery guy. No, I'm joking. It's like pizza comes, It's like God's gifts have been received. Anyways, jokes aside, but there is a truth, guys. In silence and stillness, I would say the divinity behind your eyes begins to meet you in front of your universe. It's honestly about trust. When you trust the world, it can happen for you. That's what I've learned. Anyways, Kabir says, as long as I talked unceasingly about the Lord stayed away, kept at a distance. But when I silenced my mouth, sat very still, and fixed my mind at the doorway of the Lord, I was linked to the music of the word, and all my talking came to an end. That is true. But another way to consider language's role in divinity is that if we say that the Lord, let's say if Kabir was here and if I could respond to him, I'd be like, the idea of the Lord, like just he was saying, is unconditional love. Okay? Which is another way of saying love is the supreme. Now, in order to love one's world, one has to care for the world. And in order to care for our modern world, we require to use language and speech. But in the way Kabir is saying, he is saying that if for those who really want to know what the knower within is, when you actually remain still and silent, and people are different. For me, I think I can sometimes instantaneously experience this. I think the shaman is like live streaming it 24/7. That sort of the divinity that is the mover, and through silence and stillness and effortlessness, one realizes what moves other than them. So you can say meditation is the way of you not doing anything to see what is moving the moment. It's like you stop moving the moment, and then what moves the moment reveals to you the deeper nature of being. Kabir says, if you haven't experienced it, it's not true. Imagine a skydiver gets a time machine, goes back in time, right before airplanes were made, and the person was like telling, someone, hey man, I'm a skydiver, and people would be like, you're a skydiver, what does that mean? You just jump in there, and the person's like, no man, I fall from the skies, right? And people in the past could not believe a skydiver, right? A skydiver from 2022 telling them I can dive through the sky, right? It would blow their minds. They wouldn't know how to fathom it. But when we know like the airplane exists, then it's easy to fathom. So similarly, consciousness, it's unfathomable to us, but when we know that there's something else going on, then we know consciousness, how it's happening. But in reality, it's non-conceptual. So it's as if, what is the destiny of the void? What is the destiny of the individual? What is the destiny of the dual? And what is the destiny of the infinite? And the answer is, it's inconceivable. That's it. The inconceivable is the edge of the invisible. The invisible is the edge of the visible. And before the visible was visible, it was inconceivable. Which is another way of saying the world is inconceivably being to conception. Kabir says, listen to the secret sound, the real sound which is inside you, the one no one talks of, the one no one talks of speaks the secret sound to himself, and he is the one who has made it all. Kabir says a learned man's knowledge will be of no avail to him if he doesn't have control over his tongue. Right. I think what he means here by having control over your tongue is like how much you step out of decency when you speak. Kabir says when you feel most alive, find out why. This is one guest you won't greet twice. As Kabir says, the essence of life is in remembering God. Kabir says, for millions of years you have slept. This morning will you not wake? Will you not awake? So, anyways, guys, I guess that's the end of the quote tunnel. There's this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says, "It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who, in the midst of the crowd, keeps the perfect sweetness, the independence of solitude." And so, in the subtitle I've written consensory perception here, transcendental clue. I mean, it's all a mystery until we define it. And to wonder about how we're defining it is really mysticism. How experience and existence are instantaneously being a potential of meaning. Questions are as important as answers, or even more important than answers. Questions are like open systems. New dimensions can be added. Answers are closed systems. Anybody who makes truth an answer, to seek an answer to truth, a conceptual answer to truth, you are lazy. You know. If you wonder about how truth could be, and you recognize you're in a dynamic, changing world, and it's as if, are you looking for a lifeless truth, or are you looking for the truth of life, a living truth? You know, the living truth is directly experientially engaged and is unknown. The lifeless truth is just like a chunk of image and idea and shape. You know. To become fully conscious is in some sense the tip of the iceberg, realizing how consciousness that is rooted in the unknown means its unknown presence. So it's like every human being alive, you are just the tip of an iceberg of what you are truly actually being behind the scenes. And that's the remarkable thing, you know. The small has an opportunity to participate in the big. The microcosmos, the microcosmic honor is in some sense an extension into the macrocosm. When we realize our species deserves greatness and advanced civilization, wow, much blessings and namaste. And the mystery of consciousness remains. You know, every person on the planet that is conscious and can speak and write, it's like, start researching this. You know, we need 8 billion advanced moments of wondering about what really is going on. That's a powerful force. The eyes of mankind that liberated itself from the memory of history. We start off being, like, that means in your inner realms, wonder about your most advanced self, and the outer realms, it becomes it. Anyways, guys, much blessings and us.